If you're still here when the lights go out, stay. Every story we tell comes from someone who survived long enough to whisper it back. Hit that light on the wall, the one shaped like a subscribe button, so you're not left in the dark when the next cell door opens. The cell smelled like bleach and regret, that sharp sting that makes your eyes water and your conscience itch. Midnight wasn't far off, though the light never changed much in Block C. The fluorescents hummed like flies in a jar, a constant reminder that time in here didn't pass. It stagnated. I'd been in county lockup for 42 days on a bar fight that went sideways, long enough to know the rhythm. The roll call at dawn, the metal tray clatter at noon, the soft crying at 3 a.m. from someone who still believed this place had mercy left in it. But when they brought him in, the rhythm broke. He came in silent, no cuffs. Just a guard and a priest shadowing him as if neither wanted to touch him directly. His wrists were raw, like something had chewed through metal. His name tag read, Marlowe. No first name, no number yet. The priest whispered something in Latin and crossed himself before walking away. Marlowe didn't look dangerous, not at first. He was pale, hair matted, eyes too dark for the light around him. He sat in the corner and stared at the floor, breathing through his teeth. Every few seconds his fingers twitched, small spasms like someone remembering how to play a broken piano. I told myself he was just another cracked soul the moonlight had forgotten to fix. By lights out, the silence had weight. The other inmates in nearby cells whispered about him. He's from Block E, experimental ward. Tore a guy's face off last full moon. I laughed it off. Stories grow in prison the way mold does, thick, unkillable. But then I noticed something wrong. Marlowe's breathing wasn't syncing with mine. He was inhaling when I exhaled, like he was trying to take what I let out. And his eyes, God help me, they were reflecting the tiniest shimmer from the barred window, as if there was a spark inside, waiting for a signal. Around 2 a.m., the guards started locking down tighter than usual. You could hear the chains, clicking on each door one after another. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I leaned against the cold wall and tried to sleep, but the sound began. A low, rhythmic scraping. He was carving something into the floor, with his fingernail. Not words, symbols, circles, half-moons, claws. I couldn't look away. His lips were moving, but the sound that came out wasn't speech. It was closer to growling in syllables, ancient, cracked sounds that didn't fit inside a human throat. Then the siren blared. Power failure. The lights died, swallowed by black. The emergency flood lamps flickered red for a heartbeat. And in that blood-tinted second, I saw his eyes fully illuminated, golden, animal, and aware. You shouldn't have looked at me, he said, voice layered, man and beast overlapping like bad radio frequencies. The moonlight bled through the barred window, bright as a blade. He lifted his head, slow and reverent, like a priest welcoming God, or something worse. And when he smiled, I saw teeth too long to belong to any confession. The siren died the way a throat does when a hand closes around it. In the sudden hush, the prison breathed as one animal. Pipes ticking, doors settling, distant metal conversing with itself. Red backup lights smoldered in their cages, staining the concrete like dried bruises. The moon did the rest. It slid in through the barred slit high on the wall, a blade of cold light kneading across the floor until it found Marlowe's hands. He had stopped carving. He was listening. "Do you hear it?" he asked, voice thin, almost polite. "The hinge?" I didn't answer. You don't answer a man in the dark when his eyes glow like a hunter's watch face. He turned his palms to the moonlight, and the skin there moved. It rose like dough and then tightened, veins contracting into cords, the bones underneath jostling for new positions they shouldn't have had. Each knuckle ticked, precise, like a locksmith testing pins. "Full moon," I said, "because sometimes The mouth says something stupid to keep the brain from screaming. Not full, he corrected, smiling. Enough. The first sound was not a growl. It was a seam ripping. His shirt split down the middle without help from his hands. The fabric gave way, peeling back into tired flags, and the ribs beneath were not clean white housings for a man's breath. They were bars the chest had grown around, and they were bending. I stepped back until my shoulder kissed cinder block. From the tier above us came a chorus of "Yo!" and "God!" and "What the—" all the bravery of men with steel between them and the thing they're afraid of. Boots pounded fast along the catwalk. The little slit window in our door shut with a snap. Somewhere, someone killed the comms. Silence returned, dressed like authority, and the moonlight grew brighter, bold as an auditor. Marlowe's jaw clicked, not a pop, not a crack, a click, like a latch unfastened by a satisfied thumb. His mouth opened past human, lips thinning to pale strings as teeth budded and pushed, the small ones guiltlessly abandoning their posts so the longer ones could rise. New enamel was wet, too clean, like knives straight from oil. The noise of it, that soft workman's sound of growth, made my stomach tilt. "Don't," I whispered. To who, I don't know. To him, to the moon, to the part of me that leaned forward to witness ruin. His hands went first. The fingers lengthened, joints sketching their second plans, nails funneling to points that found the floor with curious taps. Hair followed, not a sudden pelt, but a tide rolling in, first along the wrists, then the forearms, then shivering across his shoulders in a wave pattern, every shaft bright with cold light as if silver were sprouting skin deep. His spine reacted with gratitude, climbing into a new crescent. He rose to his knees, then to his feet, then to something that wasn't either. The proportions were wrong in that undeniable way reality has when it refuses to be mistaken. "Control," he said, through a throat rewriting its grammar. The word had to squeeze past the architecture going up inside him. Control is a door. You think you own it until the wind pushes. He looked at the bars on the floor between us, the symbols he'd scored with his nail now read like pages to a book I didn't want to learn. I recognized crescents, sure, but also knots of geometry that made the eye skid, shapes that looked like they'd keep time differently than clocks do. In the corners of those etchings, shallow pools of my own spilled water reflected tiny moons. When his shadow crossed those, it moved wrong, 2 seconds late, as if his darkness were on a different schedule than his body. A thud hit our door. "Back from the gate," a guard barked. His voice wanted to be iron. It turned out tin. The mighty little window slid open again. A flashlight stabbed the cell and landed on Marlowe. The beam shook. "Jesus," the guard said, too softly for prayer to hear him. The wolf smelled the light. His nostrils flared to take in its heat the way a chef inhales steam. He pivoted, and the motion was liquid punishment. Nothing dramatic, nothing roaring or theatrical, just a simple turn that told every part of me nature had taken her gloves off. "Don't shoot," I said, hands up, because a bullet knows only one language and answers every question the same way. Marlowe, what was left of that name, tilted his head as if hearing a radio buried 3 rooms away. The priest's Latin, maybe, the hinges of the moon, the heartbeat of the guard, mine. His ears climbed along his skull and sharpened, velvet pulled taut over new frames. A low sound swelled in his chest, not rage, but recognition, as if the beam of the flashlight had spelled the oldest word he knew. The guard fired, muzzle flash hammered the dark into white squares. The report lashed my eardrums. The bullet took the wolf's shoulder, and for 1 second I thought, it works. He bleeds. He did. Dark, almost black in the emergency red, but the bleeding seemed incidental, an administrative note. He stared at the wound with patient surprise, like a man finding a stain on the cuff of a beloved shirt. Then he moved. He didn't charge. He arrived. The space between him and the door collapsed. One arm, if arm still applied, lanced forward and kissed the steel mesh. The mesh had been welded to survive riots and weather, and God, it peeled like warm candy. The guard's second shot burned the wall. Claws clattered on the hallway. I saw only fragments. A hand too articulate for mercy. A tongue tasting powder, smoke. An eye that reflected not the guard, but the moon. The moon everywhere, the moon inside the pupil like a coin in a well. The scream that followed was not theatrical either. It cut off. The door was suddenly ajar, and the wolf was suddenly inside it, half through, half deciding. His shadow towered over me in two overlapping shapes, man and the old lie that man tells himself about what he is not. I slid along the wall. Fear, like a good accountant, itemized everything I owned and said you could lose this and this and this. My throat made the wrong amount of spit. I remembered the priest's hand, drifting away from Marlowe like a tether released. I remembered the guard's trembling flashlight beam and the way the light had made a word out of the air. The wolf's head turned toward me. Not a look, a measurement. Don't. I tried again, but the syllable crumbled in the wind of his breath. He took one step, and the etchings on the floor reacted. The chalky crescents grew slick, gleaming like fresh oil, and the tiny puddle moons quivered. For a flicker of a second, his paw, hand, stalled on the symbol, as if a rule had reminded him it still existed. His lip rippled. A curious, almost human frustration crossed the face that was not a face. Control, I heard. Not from him, not in the room, but like a whisper down a long hall that also led through my ribs. A memory of a voice, a lesson grafted to fear. Control is a door. I didn't think, body did. My foot smeared the nearest crescent into a long cloud. The second symbol I stomped into a river. The third, 3 scratches inside a circle, took my heel and slid into nonsense. He froze. The eyes went off me and dropped to the ruined shapes. His breath gusted, and the candles that weren't there flinched. Something in the room uncoiled. Not relief. A different coil, older, presenting itself. An opening where a lock had been. He stepped past me, to the bars, and pressed his forehead to the moonlight. Outside, beyond our tier and its curdled red glow, I heard the prison's bigger heart, trying to remember its rhythm. Generators kicking. Relays arguing, the faraway drag of a gate that hadn't moved in years coming awake. Somewhere else in the building, men were praying under their blankets in languages that had survived colder nights than this. Marlowe's voice returned for a heartbeat, a man's voice as it fell down a well. You don't understand, he told the night through the bars. They built this to hold the wrong thing. He took the bars in both hands. Fingers socketed, tendons high and bright as wire, and then the steel sang. It wasn't a squeal or a cry. It was a clean high note like a tuning fork touched to bone. The werewolf leaned into it, and the metal bowed like tall grass in weather. Muscles packed themselves under his fur like soldiers boarding a train. The concrete around the frame whispered dust. I remembered the priest's Latin. I didn't know the words, but I knew the shape faith makes when it's terrified. A circle against a circle, a door behind a door. I made a circle with my hands without meaning to, fists clasped, old habit from when I was a kid, and thunder turned the sky into an argument. Inside that little loop, my pulse kicked like a trapped bird. The last weld gave way. The bars parted not with a crash but with a relieved exhale, as if the building had been holding its stomach for too long. Air moved. Cold, clean, unprison. Air poured into us, smelling like pine tar and far roofs, like rain that had answered a different county's call. He stood in the hole he'd made and lifted his head and drew that freedom into every lung he now had. Don't kill me, I said. Honest, at last. If you can help it. He looked back at me, and for half a second, a human grief flared. Not guilt, not apology. Grief, the kind that says, I wish it were any other story. Then he was through, and I followed. because terror has many synonyms, and one of them is momentum. We stepped into the corridor together, predator and witness, and the prison's alarms began to relearn their voice. Somewhere metal thundered as the first gate rolled. Somewhere else, boots clustered, radios hissed, keys failed to matter. The moonlight crawled the walls like frost. It had found its hinge. It had found its door. Behind us, inside the cell, the symbols dried into chalk again and meant nothing. Ahead of us, the night opened like a mouth. The corridor was a throat, long and tiled, swallowing the sound of our steps. Sirens chased each other between the walls but never found their target. The alarms were blind, guessing where the danger was. The wolf's shadow stretched ahead like it was leading him, not following. Every lock we passed trembled. Steel that had survived riots, fires, even neglect, now hummed with an invisible frequency. Metal afraid of something older than rust. Marlowe walked in silence, every breath dragging fog across the air. It wasn't heat he exhaled. It was memory, the kind that smells like burnt fur and snow at once. We hit the first checkpoint. A door, triple-bolted, armed with 2 guards shaking, in the red light. They had seen him on camera already, that was obvious. Their hands were on their triggers, but their eyes weren't on the wolf. They were on each other, then, measuring who would die first. He didn't roar. He just looked at the door, then at them. One of them fired. The bullet sparked, flattened, fell. The wolf's head tilted slightly, curious, as though it had been a polite knock. The second guard bolted. His shoes slapped the wet tile and vanished around a corner. The werewolf pressed his hand against the lock. The red light from the alarm blinked once, twice, then stayed on, steady. Heat shimmered off the hinges. The lock melted, metal surrendering to will. He stepped through, ducking his horns of bone, his shoulders scraping sparks from the lintel. I followed because that's what you do when fear has already written your next line. We climbed a stairwell lined with graffiti, old names, dates, threats. On the last landing, something changed. He stopped, his nose lifted. The moonlight found him again through a high window, and he froze, caught in it like an insect in amber. For a heartbeat, he was a man again, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Marlowe," I said. He looked at me, and his voice was not the monster's this time. It was a whisper trapped in human chords. "Get out, before it calls me back." "What does?" "The moon doesn't rise," he said. "It hunts upward." And then he was gone again, bones twisting, ribs reshaping to make more room for hunger. The scream was short, 1 second of humanity tearing free from itself, and then claws bit the concrete. He lunged through the upper door, and I heard the night answer him. Outside, the sky was silver madness. The yard lights flickered against the full moon's cold glow. Guards scattered like ants under a magnifying glass. Searchlights tore the darkness, but every beam found the same thing, a figure that wasn't supposed to exist running across razor wire like it was grass. He was fast, but not chaotic. Every move had purpose, as if he remembered the map of the facility not in corridors but in scent. Then I realized the prison wasn't just holding men. It was built around him. Every block, every reinforced wall, a geometry designed to contain what he became. And now, with the power dead and the moon too strong, the entire design was collapsing. He reached the outer fence and turned. The spotlights made a halo around him, fur silver, muzzle red, eyes, still Marlowe's eyes, pleading with something no one else could see. Then he leapt. The wire snapped like violin strings. He vanished into the pines beyond the yard, and I was left standing there, under a siren that didn't know who to mourn. A guard stumbled near me, gun shaking. What was that thing? I looked up at the hole in the fence, the full moon burning. Above it, that, I said, was the reason this place never had a real warden. The wind carried a howl, not rage, not triumph, freedom. And for the first time, I felt something worse than fear. I felt recognition, because somewhere deep in my chest, the sound of that howl found an echo. The yard vomited me into night. Cold hit like a truth you've been dodging, thin and bracing, iced with pine sap and diesel from the generators trying to claw their way back to relevance. Sirens gulped and choked behind me, broadcasting confusion. To the trees, to the moon, to anything with ears and a hunger. I ran anyway, because standing still felt like admitting the story had chosen its ending without me. The outer grounds were a bad compromise between forest and control. Razor wire knotted through young pines, sodium lamps leaning on poles like tired men, gravel paths stitched in nervous lines. My shoes chewed stones, my lungs rasped, the bruised red pulse of emergency beacons made the world blink. Through that stutter, the werewolf horror came and went. A slashed silhouette on the fence line, silver hair caught mid-leap, breath yawning steam. He wasn't fleeing so much as resuming. A full moon wrote his grammar, the trees read it. I hit the breach he'd opened. The fence had curled back in obedient arcs, each barb kissed into harmless punctuation. Beyond, the land fell into old woods. Pines marched uphill, tight as soldiers, their trunks black columns of him. I listened. At first, sirens, boots, radio hiss. Then, underneath, something older, a cadence like hoof on stone, except it wasn't hooves. It was the rhythm of weight distributed by a body that had learned a better way to move. I stepped into the needles and the prison dropped off my back like an ugly coat. The lights thinned, the moonlight thickened. It painted every branch with cold logic, made the bark look scalded, showed me the path whether I deserved it or not. I found sign without trying. Sap scabbed dark where shoulders had brushed. A print, like a human hand translated for a predator. Hair snagged on thorn, shining like wire drawn from a comet. Control is a door, the memory said. You think you own it until the wind pushes. The wind pushed. The pines broadcast gossip in a language of creaks and shivers. Somewhere ahead, the lycanthrope howled, not to declare, but to check the locks of the world. My bones answered with a small shiver that wasn't cold. The slope opened into a hollow, and the hollow held an old building no one had mentioned at intake. A chapel, or what remained of one. Stone walls caved in the correct wrong places, roof tugged apart by trees putting their hands where a ceiling had once prayed. A bell lay on its side in the weeds, big as a coffin, its mouth dented, its bronze green with seasons it would not admit to having loved. The wolf's tracks circled it once, twice, like an animal killing time at a crossroads. I approached the bell, because fear is curious when it's tired. The casting bore Latin and a date impossibly earlier than the prison. The letters had been scored, then scored again, so the words were half erased, half rewritten, in nocta vigil, and then claw-marked. Under the bell's lip someone had chalked a crescent and 3 strokes. The same symbol Marlowe had carved in our cell. The chalk was new enough to smear under my finger. He had come here for a reason then, not simple flight. A return. Footsteps slid behind me. Boots, not paws. I turned with my hands up because a reflex can be practiced into politeness. The priest from intake stepped out of the shadows. Black coat torn, shock-white collar now a smudge. His face was ruddy under the moon's cruelty. He held a wooden case to his chest, like a baby that might bite. We keep losing him, he said, not with hopelessness, but with the calm of a man who's identified the structure of a tragedy. And the night keeps finding him. This is where it began. He nodded, toward the chapel. I didn't ask how he knew where I'd be. The moon had been leading all evening. It made sense that men accustomed to moon problems would learn to follow the draft. He isn't a prisoner, I said, hearing how dumb it sounded as it left, because obvious doesn't necessarily mean safe. No, the priest said. He's the ward. The other cells are for us. He unlatched the wooden case. Inside lay a bell clapper, iron swaddled in cloth, heavy as a sentence. Its surface was patterned with sigils so fine they looked like thumbprints. We thought the bell would counter the tide, he went on. An old cantor's trick. Sound to rewrite sound, a tone to confuse the hinge. It worked until it didn't. Marlowe, I said, because his name had weight I could carry. What is he, besides the obvious? The priest squinted, jaw clicking once like he had a bad memory in his teeth. He is a man who made a bargain in the wrong storm. Wolf came with it. He thought the wolf would hunt for him. It hunts through him. The cryptid folklore makes liars of men. The men forgive the stories because they need to be forgiven by something larger than law. He set the clapper down gently. The weeds leaned in, as if they had a vote. Do you understand what he did before the prison? He kept the worst things out by letting one worse thing inside, and then he tried to keep that contained. We built this geometry around his attempt, steel and liturgies, both age. The forest shuddered, not wind, a pressure change, the night taking a deeper breath. I felt the moon gather itself above the pines, the way a factory gathers into a hum before a shift. The howl that broke then was closer, and it climbed the chapel stones and wore them like a choir robe. He's back, I said, which was a sentence. That meant I am not in charge of anything that happens next. The priest lifted the clapper. Keep behind me, he said, which I did, because even doubting men pick a ritual aisle when the organ starts. The werewolf came out of the trees without hurry. Speed is for prey, and for men with time cards. He paced the edge of the clearing, with the measured arrogance of a tide, head lowered, steam ripping from his muzzle in pulses synced to the night's oldest song. His fur threw silver back in the moon's face. His eyes found me with that same measuring look, Taylor taking my ruins in seam, and then slid to the priest. Father, he said, or the voice said. It came from both the body and the bell, lying in the weeds. I felt it in my teeth, vibrating. You kept my name where it would spoil. The priest bowed his head, not to worship, but to keep it attached. Marlowe, he answered. We kept the pact, as long as we could. The werewolf shifted his weight, and the ground remembered it had been softer once. The chapel's shadow leaned toward him like it would kiss his hands if it had lips. You built a cage for weather, Marlowe said. You taught walls to sing. You taught bars to ring like a throat, and you taught teeth to argue, the priest said, voice shaking now. Do you remember why you asked us to help? When the change came regular as tide, when the city called you a miracle and then called you a crime? Who stood in the doorway while you tore out of yourself? Who let you in after you killed the men who set the dogs on your sister? We did. We are what's left of keeping watch. Silence slicked the clearing. I could hear the insects decide to mind their business. A train far away dragged itself through, a winter it hadn't earned. Why did you run? I asked before I could stop the human habit of adding commentary to cataclysm. Marlowe's eyes flicked, not at me, past me, to the fence broken, the sirens trying to become a single word, the moon craning to get a better look. Because the lock learned the key, he said. Simple. Because the full moon has a memory longer than your ledger. He stepped toward the bell. The priest hefted the clapper. The wolf's lips peeled. Both men looked more tired than afraid, which is a dangerous place where decisions wear masks. Help me, the priest said to me without turning. When I say now, push the bell. What happens if this works? We keep him, he said. We keep the world. And if it doesn't, we learn the real price, he said, and the werewolf moved. He didn't spring in an arc like a movie beast. He arrived, the way he had at the cell door, as if space had been shortened out of respect. The priest swung. The iron clapper cut a clean circle through moonlight and met ribs built like vault doors. The sound that leapt from that collision wasn't chime, but geometry. It woke the chapel's stones. The weeds flattened as if a story had stood up in their midst. Ow, the priest said, and I put my shoulder into bronze. The bell rolled and struck. The ground translated the impact into the bell's native tongue, a note shouldered up out, of metal, and took the night in both hands. The werewolf staggered, not from pain, but because sound had briefly reminded his bones of a different arrangement. His claws sketched instinct onto stone. He saw me clearly then, not as prey or witness, but as fellow debtor to the same collector. "Don't hate me," he said, and the voice had man in it again. "I already do." The bell sang again. The full moon listened. Somewhere behind us, the prison's lights found their courage and flared. The trees threw off their shadows like capes. I felt the note thread me, pulling my ribs into a more ancient cage, teaching my heart a slower meter. The wolf shook, and for a breath only, he was Marlowe on his knees, palms up, like a pupil grateful to fail a test the right way. The priest lifted the clapper for the last stroke, eyes bright, with tears that had learned better than to fall. "Forgive us," he said to a god he wasn't sure was clocking in tonight. The wind changed, not west to east, not warm to cold. The age of the wind changed. Pine needles hissed a word I didn't know. The bell's third note rose, and the moon, impolite at last, answered. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was a cancelling. The note inverted on itself, like a mirror swallowing what it showed. The bell went mute under the priest's blow. The werewolf's head lifted. His ears cut the air into better pieces. Behind his eyes, something opened that would not be closed by men or iron or borrowed Latin. He said my name. I hadn't told him my name. Hearing it gave me the small, dizzy shame of being perfectly seen. "Run," Marlowe told me, and the wolf's mouth made the same shape. "Whatever we do, it will involve you." He hit the bell with his bare hand. The bronze dented under his palm like soft fruit. The priest's clapper dropped. The case fell open. The old geometry scattered like feathers that had remembered they were stone. Sirens flooded the trees, lights staggered toward us through the trunks. The clearing filled with the world again. The moon did not leave. It simply adjusted its chair for the long conversation. I stepped back because my legs thought it reasonable. The werewolf and the priest faced one another in air that had sharpened its teeth. The bell sulked, reshaped. The chapel leaned in like an old friend with bad advice. I understood then that the prison had never been the center. This hollow, this bell, this pact, they were the reason for everything built downhill. County lockup was a downhill echo. The truth lived here, where the pines knew to whisper, "Name the thing and it names you back." I turned, not brave, just obedient to the biology that says live first, understand later. As I ran, the howl that followed me braided two sounds, a man calling out from a well and a werewolf answering from the lip. The forest listened the way a courtroom does right before the verdict. The air beyond the chapel was thick with questions no one wanted to answer. The forest had gone quiet again, not the soft, living quiet of rest, but the kind that falls when something bigger than predators decides it's listening. The moon hung too close, too curious, a cold god craning over its altar. I didn't make it far before the ground dipped into a ravine laced with mist. The trees leaned inward, old pines bending like witnesses. Somewhere behind me, the bell still trembled, as though trying to remember what its last note meant. And under that, a sound rolled low through the earth, a heartbeat trying to restart a corpse. I wasn't sure whether it was the priest, the wolf, or the world itself that had made it. Halfway down the ravine, I stumbled on something unnatural. A fence half-eaten by moss, ringed in iron that wasn't prison grade but ritual grade. Every post carved with lunar phases notched perfectly, a containment circle once meant to hold something that had long outgrown the idea of being contained. The symbols matched the ones from the cell. That's when I realized the prison wasn't the origin, it was the replica. The prototype had been here, in these woods, where Marlowe's curse had first been bound in iron and prayer. The county lockup was just a shadow cast by this ancient geometry, a copy built by people who thought they could translate superstition into security design. And now the original cage was opening. The wind shifted, my breath fogged. The mist carried a growl that wasn't entirely outside me. Marlowe, or what wore his memory, stepped from the tree line. His fur gleamed wet with moonlight. His chest was a map of wounds drawn too deep to heal, each one silvering at the edges like frostbite. The human voice was gone now. But his eyes, they still had grammar, still had sorrow. I raised my hands like confession. "You said it would involve me." He nodded once, deliberate, as if agreeing with the moon. Then he stepped into the old circle, claws sinking into the ash and rust. The air around him hummed, the same vibration that had shaken our cell door before it gave. The iron began to glow faintly red. He wasn't escaping anymore. He was finishing what he started. Every breath he took now came with a crackle, like wood catching flame. The wind around him spun into a small cyclone, scattering pine needles that burned as they passed through his aura. His claws scraped symbols into the dirt, completing the pattern the priest had failed to finish. It was no longer a containment mark. It was an invitation. The moon responded like an eye dilating. Behind me, branches snapped. Soldiers, guards, floodlights, chaos returning in uniforms. They yelled my name, told me to get down. I tried to speak, to warn them that guns meant nothing here, but their bullets had already learned arrogance. The first shot hit Marlowe's shoulder. The sound it made wasn't meat, it was thunder arguing with a drum. The second volley hit air. The bullets twisted in mid-flight, melting into sparks before touching fur. The soldiers screamed, dropping their weapons, metal branding their palms, and then everything went still. Marlowe turned his head toward me. The words came not from his mouth, but the air itself, vibrating the marrow in my bones. "You saw the cell. You saw the circle. You saw the priest fail. You know what must close the door." The realization landed heavy, heavier than the moonlight. It wasn't the priest or the bell that completed the seal. It was the witness. The curse needed a soul tethered by fear, not faith. My knees buckled. "No, you can't." But he could. His hand, claw, pressed against my chest, right where the heart flinches before a bad memory. His claws didn't pierce, they etched. Heat branded me, symbols forming just beneath the skin, crescents, claws, circles. The same language, from the floor, now written in flesh. "Control," he whispered through the night, his tone neither human nor beast, "is a door you keep closing on yourself." The light surged. The guards vanished in the white-out glare. The forest screamed, all its branches bowing toward the center of the ritual. I remember falling backward, not from impact but from weight, like gravity had been traded for meaning. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the moon was higher, smaller, distant again, like a god tired of its game. The clearing was empty except for smoke and the broken bell. The iron posts were cold. The priest's body lay near the chapel door, hand still clutching the useless clapper, and my chest, still hot, pulsed in rhythm with the dying hum of the sigils in the dirt. From the tree line, I heard something breathing, familiar, restrained, a mirror of my own lungs. I didn't look. I didn't have to. The forest already knew my name. I woke to a square of light on a gray ceiling, hospital white, humming hard, the kind you learn to hate in installments. A cuff answered my first twitch with a cold tug, wrist to rail, the other wrist free. A negotiation. "You're dangerous, but not impossible." The room smelled like antiseptic, coffee burned into iron and night rain. A monitor counted my heart in green patience. Someone had taped gauze over my sternum, neat as a folded apology. A voice outside the curtain said, "He's up," and the voice inside my head said, "Control is a door." The curtain hissed back. A detective with a winter face stepped in, parka, oversuit, eyes that had seen grief domesticated into paperwork. Behind him, a guard kept his hand near a taser like electricity could convince the moon to mind its manners. "You're lucky," the detective said, and his tone suggested that luck was a type of debt. "Search teams found you near the chapel, around dawn, lost a priest, lost a lot of sense. Gained one civilian who won't stop muttering Latin in the negative. He took a breath that changed the weather by a degree. What happened out there? I opened my mouth. The dryness hurt. The truth hurt more. A werewolf story happened, I said, and watched their faces not change. They were trained for nouns like that. They put them in drawers labeled unhelpful. We got animal prints, the guard offered, because facts feel braver when they come with tread depth. Got claw rakes through bronze. Got fence guts. Cameras show silhouettes. Static, like the moon mashed the signal. The detective clicked a pen he didn't intend to use. The prison reports an outage, a breach, and a large unknown male leaving through a pine wall like it signed a form first. His gaze traveled down to the bandage centered on me. What did he leave in you? The room had been waiting for that question. My chest answered by itself, a warm pulse under the gauze that wasn't heartbeat, a pattern. 3 soft knocks. From inside, perfectly spaced like someone testing a freshly installed door. He said it would involve me. I told the ceiling like it might be a notary. He used me to close something, or open it. The difference is a lawyer's word in a wolf's mouth. The detective's eyes held mine until they confirmed I was not trying to be funny. Then he nodded once. He looked at the guard. Uncuff him. You sure? No, he said. But fear is a bad prosthetic for judgment. He turned back. To me. You can sign for your body later. Right now, we need your memory. The cuff fell away with a small, relieved sigh. The detective pulled up a chair that made old metal noises. Start with the man's name. Marlowe, I said, and the monitor hiccuped. The pulse under my bandage throbbed once in agreement, as if the syllables were a key rubbing against velvet. Full name? He doesn't keep one long, I said. He wears names until the moon asks for something truer. The detective's breath clouded a tiny bit, and I realized there was a draft that only I could feel. The air above me chilled, the monitor steadied. My chest warmed again, heat lifting into my throat like steam into an empty room. They left me with a paper cup of water and a door they didn't fully close. Footsteps retreated down the hall. I could hear a television in a waiting room rehearsing. The word incident, the bandage moved, not lifted, shifted, as if the skin beneath were shrugging into a jacket. I peeled the tape back. Under the gauze, my sternum was marked. No blood, no raised scar, just darkened flesh shaped into 3 crescents, interlocked like a lock diagram. Their edges shimmered, faintly, not light, but the memory of light. The kind moonlight leaves behind after you blink. A smell came with it, clean and wrong, pine smoke, cold iron, the ghost of old fur. The curtain sighed again. The detective, to his credit, returned unannounced. He looked at the mark without flinching. Tell me that's a tattoo, he said. It's a key, I said, and the word tasted like I had bitten a battery. He didn't write that down either. We've searched the chapel. The bell's wrecked, like it owed money to weather. The priest, Father Corrin, he didn't make it. His gaze landed on the crescents again, and something gentle crossed his winter. Did he die? Helping? Yes, I said, and the key knocked under my ribs. 3 soft notes. Yes, yes, yes. The detective nodded once, grief stapled into the exact number of gestures required by duty. We're going to move you, he went on. Not for punishment, for geometry. He paused, measuring my face against the word. There are rooms under the prison that most budgets pretend don't exist. We call it E. You were in county 42 days. You heard the stories. Experiment ward, I said. Full moon stories that get bigger in the retelling. They don't get bigger, he said. They get measured. He gestured at my chest. Bring your new watch. They wheeled me out past the nurse who didn't look at me directly, the guard who decided prayer might be an option after all, the vending machine that hummed the same note the bell had tried for. Night was returning by the time we hit the transport bay. Clouds traveled fast, low-bellied. The detective drove. The guard rode shotgun, hand hovering over not help. I watched the sky through the rear window and felt the mark under my sternum. Keep time with something I could not see. Back at County, lights spilled like regret. We didn't go in through processing. We went down a road that pretended to be a maintenance lane until it confessed to being a mouth. A heavy door considered us, accepted the detective's badge, and opened on a breath of stone. The elevator was the old kind that punishes impatience. It descended like it wasn't sure hell was still renting. Level E smelled like clean earth, old copper, and hymns sung by men who didn't believe the words, but believed in singing together. The corridor curved, no straight lines, nothing for momentum to get drunk on. Circles painted into the floor like polite threats. Lamps in cages that looked ceremonial, not practical, paid out light in coins rather than bills. They put me in a room with no corners. A cot hugged the wall, a window too small for anything but moon argued with a ceiling too smooth to hide in. There were marks on the floor, the same crescents that had appeared on me, plus notches like calendar teeth. Safe room, the detective said. Safer than upstairs. For who? I asked. Yes, he said, and left, the door sealed. The air adjusted to my breathing as if it had been waiting to copy it. Alone, the body tells the truth it had been saving. My hands shook. Not fear. Recognition. A current rising from the soles to the skull, threading nerve to nerve like a careful seamstress. Then the change began. Not bones, not yet. That would be later, if I ever gave the door the wrong answer. This was subtler, crueler. The world sharpened. Sound took its shoes off and walked barefoot over the floor. I could hear the pipes conversing about pressure, a moth negotiating with a lampshade, a guard's radio murmuring 3 doors down about a sandwich. Under it all, the cadence, the werewolf cadence, like footsteps on stone that were not footsteps at all. A werewolf horror can be loud. This was quiet. The horror of matching a rhythm you did not choose. I curled my hands until the knuckles matched the crescents. The mark in my chest pulsed, and I understood something that didn't require Latin. I had become the hinge. The lock wasn't to keep something out. It was to teach something how to pass without kicking. A slot opened in the door. A tray slid. In, water, bread. A little vial sealed with wax. The detective's voice came through a grill that blended with the wall. Drink the water. Eat the bread. Smell the vial. Don't open it. What's in the vial? Remorse, he said, and the grill closed. I did as instructed because instruction is a kind of inheritance. The water tasted like a stream remembering snow. The bread was coarse and honest. The vial, when I held it under my nose, exhaled a smell that pulled my eyes wet. A garage at dusk, my father's coat, a dog I should have let out sooner, a name I said too late. The mark softened under the grief. The rhythm in my chest slowed. Control, the night reminded me, is a door you keep closing on yourself. I slept in increments, woke to the moon negotiating with the window, dreamed of a bell that had learned to whisper rather than ring. Somewhere above, the prison reassembled its duties. Somewhere in the trees, a wolf measured the perimeter of a problem he had handed me. Before dawn, the slot opened again. No tray, just the detective's voice, and under it, something heavier, like a decision already signed. When the moon sets, he said, you'll go upstairs, not to release, to work. Work, ward work, he said. You witnessed, the seal took your name. That makes you a door we can talk to. What about Marlowe? The silence that followed cracked like thin ice. He ran the line as far as he could. You'll pick it up. That's the bargain the night remembers. The slot shut. The room relaxed in the way a room does when it knows you don't have anywhere else to be. I lay back and watched the window. Narrow as morning pushed the moon down the sky like a reluctant witness. The crescents across my chest cooled. The rhythm became my own again, mostly. When sleep came this time, it brought a single sentence dressed as a dream. Doors don't choose who knocks. They choose how they hold. I woke with the taste of iron at the back of my throat and the knowledge that Section 7 was not a section at all. It was a job description. The moon set. The door opened. The corridor, curve after curve, waited like a patient argument. I stood. The mark warmed once, twice, 3 times. I stepped forward and the prison welcomed me like a chapel that knew my name. Day makes men brave because it puts a ceiling on the sky. The first shift met me with coffee breath, paperwork, and a question they'd never ask out loud. Are you a problem we can turn into a solution? I signed pages that did not admit to describing me. They briefed me under the fluorescent parish, rotations, protocols, panic words we would not use. E was seismic maintenance on the map. We nodded to the lie like gentlemen in a hallway. They showed me the circuits of level E, the routes that have no straight line because monsters love an easy run-up. The symbols on the floor had been repainted, fresh, steady hand, not religious, craft. I met the night staff, the kinds of people who can say cryptid oversight without smirking, whose wrists carry tiny burn scars from touching old metal that remembers summer. A woman named Janus, scar from lip to ear, voice kept low on purpose, gave me a roll of chalk like she was handing over weather. Shapes matter, she said. Angles invite, curves advise. Draw what you feel, not what you fear. What happens if I feel wrong? You'll know, she said. It will come closer. We walked the ring. At each alcove a handset hung on a chain, the old telephone kind with weight to prove itself. They don't call out, Janus said. They call in. You'll hear it before it rings. Answer on the second breath, never on the first. What am I listening for? The door, she said, nodding at my sternum. It talks through wood when it wants to learn manners. At noon, the detective appeared with a file, and the tiredness that crowns you when you give yourself to a problem that won't applaud. We've got movement on the north tree line, he said. Cameras show heat signatures that aren't deer. Howl reports from the ridge. You sit the first watch tonight. Alone? No one's alone down here, Janus said. That's the point. Evening dropped its coat over the county. The sky took on the color of old steel. I ate the bread, drank the water, held the vial and let it unlatch my better sins. When the moon shouldered up like a shoulder under a bar, the mark on my chest warmed without asking. I stood in the round room with the small window and watched its light find me. My breath synced to a rhythm that had learned not to scare me. Control, door, control. The handset in alcove 3 exhaled a quiet presence. The second breath arrived. I picked up. I didn't hear words. I heard arrangement. The way a forest decides where a path is. The way teeth decide how to meet without breaking. Under it, that bell note geometry, bruised but not gone. It bent through. My ear and into my sternum considered the new lock it had made of me and tried the handle. Across the speakerless plastic, a shape formed in my head. Pine, snow, a lean shadow wearing silver like rain. Marlowe. Not near, not far. The sense you get of a train you can't see yet, making mountains shrug. I'm here, I said, and I wasn't saying it to the phone. My room leaned with the curve of the corridor. The crescents on the floor came into focus like a map whose legend you finally learned. I stepped to the middle, chalk in hand, and drew what didn't scare me. A circle that refused perfection. 3 lines that didn't meet exactly. A crescent with a small flaw in its back. Imperfections men call human. The chalk felt warm. The chalk felt watched. Janus's voice moved through the wall, not a shout, not a whisper. Good. Keep it conversational. The moon climbed. The building softened. The cameras survived. Upstairs, men played at routine, counts, rounds, reports prepared for baffles. Down here, the geometry breathed. I matched it breath for breath, not resisting, not inviting, advising. Around 1, the handset sighed again. Second breath. I answered. He was closer, not in body, in intention. I could feel him traveling the edge of the woods, measuring every fence like a tailor, stopping where the chapel had leaned into his name. The bell complained in the dirt about its new shape. The pines said the word they'd been saving. The mark under my skin replied with 3 pulses that had become mine. Here, here, here. A voice a man could call a thought-formed witness. Yes, I answered, and the chalk in my hand didn't shake. Hinge, it said, and the handset in my palm went cold with approval. Door, I said back. The howl came then, not to announce him, but to align us. It flooded the corridors, went round and round, kissed each lamp cage, blessed each curve, knocked each symbol for wood. The other watchers lifted their heads at their stations. No panic, a choir, letting the old note through. Footsteps above, radios startled into words. The detective at a monitor whispering to a man he trusted because the lie required 2. The window poured a measured square of moon across my floor. I stepped into it. The mark warmed. The chalk line glowed a polite gray. The handset fell silent. Not dead. Satisfied. Hold, Janus breathed from the wall. I held. The presence stopped at the stones above the old bell. It sniffed investigation into the dirt. It tapped the world with 1 claw, asking where the grain ran, whether the door would behave. My sternum answered in 3 pulses. The geometry under the prison rose like a low tide that becomes a harbor everyone pretends is a miracle. I didn't push. I didn't open. I held, the way a shoulder holds a door closed not with anger, but with the weight of being home. Outside, the howl tapered into a long line and snapped off. The lights upstairs steadied. The radios traded weather like secrets you can say out loud. The handset cooled in my hand until it had only ever been plastic. Good, Janus said, and the building agreed. I slept at dawn in increments, woke to coffee that had learned humility. Signed a form that called me a consultant because no department keeps a line item for Hinge. The detective clapped my shoulder the way men do when the softer thing would embarrass them both. Janus slid the chalk back into my pocket without comment. On the walk out, I looked up through the grates to the square of sky the prison allows itself. Day carried no apology. The pines kept their gossip. The bell in the ruined chapel kept its new dent like a tattoo an old sailor knows better than to explain. I paused at the outer door. The world smelled like newspapers and wet tires and the cheap joy of a bakery 3 blocks down. Ordinary, that rare jewel. The mark knocked once under my ribs, a reminder and a promise. I knocked back, lightly. Here, here, here. Night will come. Again. The moon will lower its shoulder and ask what kind of door I am. Some evenings, I will be oak. Some, I will be a bead curtain and regret it. But I will hold and I will listen and I will draw shapes that advise. If you hear a howl that sounds like memory calling your name, don't go to the window. Stand with your back to the door you love most. Breathe the slow grammar. Cry if you must. Smell something you lost. Let the hinge find you, and if you need a light on, come down to the place that pretends to be a prison. Ask for level E. Tell them you're here to witness. We will answer on the second breath. If this were just a werewolf horror and not a werewolf story, I'd give you blood and an ending. But endings are for rooms with corners. We live in the curve, you and I, the long watch, the night that remembers, the pact between fear and breath. If you heard the cadence, if you felt the door knock under your ribs, stay with us in the dark a little longer. Trust the old shapes. Keep the bell in your voice, and when the moon hunts upward again, I'll be here, chalk in hand, holding. The next full moon's already on the calendar. If you want to know what broke loose after he ran, follow the howl, like, share, and leave a mark in the comments so the others know you made it out.